At the family court case, my ex-husband's sister shouted that I just wanted money, not the kids. Her mother nodded, telling the room I was using my child as a pawn. I stayed quiet until my 8-year-old son walked to the witness stand. He looked the judge in the eye and said the exact words his father ordered him never to say. He revealed a truth so dark that even the bailiff gasped, and the judge wiped tears from her eyes. My name is Lauren. I am 34 years old, and I work as a freelance data privacy consultant. If you have ever been pushed to the edge by a toxic family who thought they could walk all over you, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to hear exactly how a quiet mother finally fought back and dismantled the people who tried to steal her son. The nightmare that led to that explosive courtroom moment started 3 months earlier. It was a warm Tuesday evening in the crowded auditorium of Oak Ridge Elementary School. My son Leo had just finished performing in the second-grade spring play. Standing near the edge of the stage with a bouquet of yellow sunflowers, my heart swelled with immense pride. I wore my comfortable jeans and a simple gray sweater, blending in perfectly with the suburban parents around me. I lived a quiet life, focused on raising my son and doing consulting work from my home office. The joyful atmosphere shattered the second the double doors at the back of the room swung open. The crowd noise dropped as people turned to look. In walked Trent, my 35-year-old ex-husband. He wore a tailored navy suit projecting aggressive wealth, his chin held high with the narcissistic arrogance I had spent years trying to escape. Flanking him like bodyguards were 2 women who had made my marriage a living hell. On his right was his mother Sylvia, a 62-year-old woman who masked her extremely controlling nature behind silk blouses and gold jewelry. On his left was his 32-year-old sister Vanessa, clutching a designer handbag with an expression of sheer, permanent distaste. Trailing slightly behind their intimidating formation was a man in a wrinkled suit carrying a very thick manila folder. Trent marched straight down the center aisle toward me, completely ignoring the other parents who were forced to quickly step out of his way. He did not even once glance toward the stage where little Leo was waving excitedly, hoping to catch his father's eye. Trent looked only at me, his gaze filled with a terrifying, malicious triumph. As they closed the distance, the man in the cheap suit stepped around Trent and shoved the heavy manila folder directly against my chest. "You have been served," the man muttered very quickly before turning on his heel and walking back up the aisle. I clutched the thick envelope, a sudden cold wave of dread washing over me. Before I could process what was happening, Sylvia let out a loud theatrical sigh. She pitched her voice so that every parent within a 20-foot radius turned to watch us. "It is an emergency petition for full custody," Lauren Sylvia announced, ensuring her words echoed through the quiet auditorium. "We simply cannot let that boy live in your disgusting squalor any longer. It breaks my heart to see my grandson suffering because his mother refuses to provide a proper life for him." Trent stepped closer to physically intimidate me. "You are a complete mess, Lauren," he sneered, looking me up and down with exaggerated disgust. "Look at you. You are wearing rags to our son's school event. You sit around at home on your computer all day pretending to work while our boy goes without basic necessities." He reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and threw it at my feet. It fluttered to the gymnasium floor between us. It was just a grocery store receipt. "Your credit card was declined at the supermarket yesterday," Trent said, his voice booming across the room so the school principal and Leo's teachers could hear every humiliating word. "You are a jobless failure who cannot even afford to buy a loaf of bread, let alone raise a growing boy. I am taking Leo away from you. He deserves a successful father who can actually provide for him, not a deadbeat mother who lives paycheck to paycheck and begs for scraps." Vanessa jumped in to support her brother, pushing her sunglasses up onto her perfectly styled hair. "It is honestly child abuse keeping him in that tiny house of yours," she declared, crossing her arms. "Trent is a highly successful executive. He has a real home in a real neighborhood. You are just a parasite trying to squeeze child support out of my brother because you are too lazy to get a real career. Everyone here needs to know what a complete fraud you are." I stood frozen, holding the custody papers. The whispers started immediately. I felt the stares of the other mothers casting judgmental glances my way. Trent stood there smirking, waiting for me to break down. He expected tears. He expected me to beg. He expected the quiet woman he divorced to crumble under his public attack and his family's wealth. He genuinely thought I was a struggling freelancer who could barely keep the lights on. He thought the declined card meant I was broke. What Trent, Sylvia, and Vanessa did not know was that the card declined only because I froze that specific public account after detecting a minor security breach. They did not know my modest lifestyle was a deliberate choice, a careful cover for the highly lucrative cybersecurity and data privacy firm I operated under a secure corporate entity. They had no idea who they were actually messing with. I stared at the crumpled grocery receipt on the floor, then looked up at Trent's smug face. He was waiting for a reaction, waiting for me to shatter into a million pieces right there in the school auditorium. Sylvia had her phone out, likely ready to record my supposed psychotic break, while Vanessa crossed her arms. A triumphant smirk plastered across her heavily made-up face, but I did not give them the satisfaction. I simply smoothed the front of my gray sweater, bent down, and picked up the receipt. I handed it back to Trent with a perfectly calm, polite smile. "You drop this," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the panic they so desperately wanted to hear. Trent frowned, clearly confused by my lack of tears. The surrounding parents, who had been holding their breath, began to murmur among themselves. I turned my back on my ex-husband and his toxic family, signaling to Leo, who was waiting near the stage steps. My brave 8-year-old boy jogged over to me, handing me his sunflowers. I kissed his forehead, telling him how incredibly proud I was of his performance as the lead narrator in the play. "Mom, why is Dad yelling?" Leo asked quietly, his large brown eyes darting toward Trent and his grandmother. "He is just having a loud day, sweetie," I replied, shielding him from their venom. "Let us go say hi to Principal Davies before we head home." I guided Leo toward the administrative desk set up near the gymnasium exit. Trent, Sylvia, and Vanessa followed closely behind us, like vultures sensing weakness, eager to continue their public humiliation campaign. Principal Davies, a kind woman who had always been supportive of Leo, stood behind the desk managing the school's annual technology fundraiser. She looked deeply uncomfortable having witnessed Trent's outburst. "Lauren, is everything all right?" Principal Davies asked softly as I approached the desk. "Everything is perfectly fine," I assured her, resting a protective hand on Leo's shoulder. "In fact, I wanted to speak with you about the technology fundraiser. I saw the email update this morning stating that the school is still short on the budget to replace the outdated computer lab equipment." Trent let out a loud, mocking laugh from right behind me. "Are you seriously asking about a charity drive right now? You cannot even afford to buy groceries, Lauren. Do not embarrass yourself further. You are going to need every penny you can scrounge up to pay for a lawyer. When I take full custody of my son," I ignored him completely. "How much is the remaining balance to hit the goal?" I asked Principal Davies. She looked nervously at Trent, then back at me. "Well, we still need $45,000 to fully fund the new lab, but any small contribution helps, Lauren. You do not need to worry about it today." I reached into my simple leather crossbody bag and bypassed my personal wallet. Instead, I opened a hidden compartment and pulled out a heavy matte black metal card. It carried no personal name, only the discreet logo of my anonymous cybersecurity limited liability company. I placed it gently on the payment terminal. "I will cover the remaining $45,000, I said, clearly ensuring the parents lingering nearby could hear. "Please process it as a single transaction under corporate sponsorship." The silence that fell over the administrative desk was absolute. Principal Davies stared at the heavy metal card, then looked up at me with her mouth slightly open. Trent actually stumbled forward, his polished shoes scraping against the linoleum floor as he tried to get a better look at the card. "What is that?" Trent demanded, his voice cracking with sudden uncertainty. "Whose card did you steal, Lauren? You do not have that kind of money. You are a freelance nobody." The payment terminal beeped a cheerful tone of approval. The transaction processed instantly, clearing the massive amount without a single issue. A long receipt began to print, and Principal Davies handed it to me with shaking hands. "Thank you so much, Lauren," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock and profound gratitude. "This is going to change everything for our students." "You are very welcome," I replied, signing the merchant copy with a steady hand. Every child deserves access to proper technology. I turned to face Trent, Sylvia, and Vanessa. Their triumphant sneers had completely vanished, replaced by identical expressions of sheer, unadulterated bewilderment. Sylvia's jaw was practically resting on her pearls. Vanessa had lowered her phone, forgetting to record. "Have a wonderful evening, Trent," I said pleasantly. "I will have my legal team review your cute little custody petition in the morning." Without waiting for his response, I took Leo's hand and walked out the double doors of the auditorium, leaving the Golden family completely speechless in the wake of my transaction. The cool evening air felt refreshing against my face as we walked across the school courtyard toward the parking lot. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had spent years hiding my success to protect my peace, knowing Trent's massive ego could never handle a woman out-earning him. But now they had declared war, and I was no longer going to play the defenseless victim. However, my sense of victory was incredibly short-lived. As we approached my reliable 5-year-old sedan, parked under the dim glow of a streetlight, I immediately noticed something was horribly wrong. The car was leaning at an unnatural angle. I stopped walking instinctively, pulling Leo behind me. All 4 tires on my vehicle had been brutally slashed. Someone had completely immobilized my car while I was inside. Tucked under my windshield wiper was an aggressive formal notice from Child Protective Services demanding my absolute and immediate compliance. They wanted to break me down, but they were making a massive and entirely unforgivable legal mistake, which would cost them absolutely everything. Soon I called a private towing service and arranged a secure ride home for Leo and myself. The ride back to our quiet neighborhood was tense, but I kept my demeanor completely calm for my son. We walked through the front door of our modest single-story house, a sanctuary I maintained. Everything was spotless, from the hardwood floors to the organized bookshelves lining the living room walls. I had barely managed to hang my coat and ask Leo to wash his hands for a late dinner when 2 sharp, authoritative knocks echoed through the front hallway. I knew instantly that the aggressive formal notice left on my windshield was not an empty threat. The reality of my ex-husband's toxic family and their relentless pursuit to destroy my peace had officially arrived at my doorstep. I took a deep breath, smoothing my gray sweater, and walked toward the entrance, mentally preparing myself for whatever orchestrated chaos Trent and Sylvia had unleashed upon my home. I opened the door to find a stern-looking man and a strictly professional woman holding clipboards. They introduced themselves as investigators from Child Protective Services. Their official identification badges gleamed under the warm glow of my porch light, confirming the severity of the situation. The female investigator stepped forward, her posture rigid, explaining they had received an anonymous emergency report classifying my home as an active hazard. She recited a list of utterly fabricated accusations, claiming the house was littered with hazardous trash, lacking basic utilities, and that my son was severely malnourished and subjected to constant unlivable neglect. I knew immediately this was Vanessa's handiwork. The exaggerated malicious wording matched her dramatic toxic personality perfectly. She always loved playing the concerned citizen while hiding a deeply venomous agenda behind her fake smiles. They wanted to catch me off guard, hoping to find a panicked, exhausted mother who fit the exact profile Trent had desperately tried to paint at the school play earlier that evening. I invited them inside without a single moment of hesitation, stepping aside to reveal my immaculate, brightly lit living room. The investigators exchanged a brief look of confusion as they crossed the threshold, fully expecting to find the terrifying squalor detailed in the anonymous report. Instead, they found the faint, comforting scent of lemon cleaner and a home that was meticulously organized. I offered them a comprehensive tour, guiding them confidently through the fully stocked kitchen. The pristine bathrooms, and Leo's bedroom, which was filled with educational toys, clean clothes, and a neatly made bed. The male investigator opened the refrigerator, noting the abundance of fresh produce, organic milk, and healthy meals I had meal prepped for the entire week. The fabricated narrative Vanessa had spun was unraveling instantly before their professional eyes. They could see clearly that I was a dedicated mother, providing a secure and nurturing environment far removed from the horrific accusations filed against me. I watched their rigid shoulders relax slightly as they realized the initial report was drastically misleading. Just as the tension seemed to dissipate and the investigators began to lower their guard, Leo walked out of his bathroom, rolling up the sleeves of his favorite superhero pajamas to dry his hands on a towel. The female investigator crouched down to his eye level, introducing herself with a practiced, gentle tone. She asked him what he had for lunch, how he liked his school, and if he felt safe and happy at home. Leo answered happily, detailing the nutritious meals I packed for him and how much he loved his teachers. Then the investigator's eyes zeroed in on his left forearm. Just above his elbow was a dark purple and yellowish bruise, a severe mark that stood out starkly against his pale skin. The atmosphere in the room shifted, immediately dropping by 10 degrees. The investigators stood up, their expressions instantly hardening into masks of absolute suspicion. They demanded an immediate explanation for the injury, asking Leo directly how he had acquired such a massive bruise. I felt a sudden, sickening jolt of realization wash over me. Sylvia had meticulously planned this entire sequence of events. She had coached Trent to use this specific bruise as the ultimate weapon against me. They knew exactly how he got it, because Trent was the one responsible for it occurring during his designated visitation time. My mind raced rapidly, connecting the dark dots of their vicious strategy. This was never just about humiliating me at the school play or attempting to force me out of my modest home through sheer financial intimidation. This was a highly coordinated, calculated, and deeply malicious attack designed to systematically destroy my entire life. They wanted to rip my son away from me, and they were willing to weaponize a state child welfare agency to do it. They had slashed my tires to ensure I would be flustered and delayed arriving home, just as Child Protective Services showed up, hoping to catch me in a moment of extreme emotional vulnerability. They had submitted the false report to guarantee a home invasion, and they had banked entirely on the investigators finding that specific bruise on my son's arm to seal my fate. The male investigator took a heavy step toward me, his voice dropping an octave as he informed me that unexplained physical trauma was grounds for immediate removal of the child from the premises. He read me my rights regarding the ongoing investigation, stating that any physical abuse was a severe criminal offense and they had the authority to take Leo into emergency custody right then and there. I looked at the dark mark on my beautiful boy's arm and felt a surge of maternal fury so intense it nearly knocked the breath out of my lungs. Trent and Sylvia had crossed a line that could never ever be uncrossed. They thought I would surrender, but I was preparing to destroy their facade using the evidence they tried to hide from me. The male investigator crossed his arms, waiting for my excuse, expecting tears. Panic and the frantic defense of a mother caught lying. Instead, I calmly asked Leo to go into the living room and put on his favorite animated cartoon. Once my son was out of earshot, I turned back to the state agents. I did not shed a single tear. I gestured toward the polished marble island in my kitchen and politely invited them to sit down. I opened my laptop, bypassed the standard login screen, and accessed the encrypted server utilized for my cybersecurity firm. I typed in a string of complex passcodes and brought up my integrated home security network. I have cameras covering every common area of this property, I explained, turning the screen so they could see the feeds. I maintain these for my professional security, but they also serve as a perfect domestic log. I clicked through the archived footage from the past 30 days. The agents watched intently as the screen displayed a continuous loop of domestic peace. They saw me cooking healthy dinners, helping Leo with homework, and tucking him into bed every night at exactly 8 o'clock. They saw a clean home filled with absolute stability. The fabricated report Vanessa submitted claimed my house was a hazardous wasteland. My digital footprint proved it was a fortress of maternal care. The female investigator leaned closer to the screen, her rigid posture softening. The squalor and neglect outlined in the anonymous tip completely evaporated. However, the male investigator tapped his pen against his clipboard, reminding us of the physical evidence they had just seen. A clean house does not explain a severe contusion on an 8-year-old child, he stated firmly. I nodded, expecting that exact question. That bruise occurred exactly 6 days ago, I replied, my voice steady and cold. It happened during the court-ordered visitation weekend for my ex-husband. I opened a new secure tab on my laptop and accessed the cloud storage linked to my personal devices. As a data privacy expert, I track everything that matters to me. I pulled up the location history linked to the Apple AirTag sewn into the lining of the backpack belonging to Leo. I projected the GPS data onto the screen, overlaying the coordinates with the specific timestamps from last Saturday afternoon. Trent was supposed to be taking Leo to a supervised indoor trampoline park. Instead, the tracking data showed a completely different, highly disturbing reality. The red marker on the map placed the backpack at a notoriously seedy underground betting parlor on the outskirts of the city. I zoomed in on the satellite view, showing the desolate parking lot where the tracker remained entirely stationary for 4 consecutive hours. Trent left an 8-year-old boy locked inside a parked car in a dangerous zone while he gambled, I explained, watching the color drain from their faces. Leo got bored, managed to open the car door to look for his father, tripped over a concrete bumper and landed hard on his arm. Pulled up a text message exchange from that same evening. It was a message from Trent to his mother, Sylvia, which I had legally obtained from the synced tablet belonging to Leo. The message read, "The kid fell in the lot and got a massive bruise. Tell Vanessa to take pictures and call the state hotline next week so we can pin it on Lauren." The silence in my kitchen was absolute. The two CPS investigators stared at the glowing screen, their professional skepticism entirely replaced by sheer horror. The male investigator set his pen down slowly, his eyes fixed on the damning text message and the indisputable GPS coordinates. They suddenly realized they were not investigating a negligent mother. They had been manipulated and weaponized by a malicious, wealthy family, desperate to steal a child to cover up their own dangerous, illegal behavior. The female investigator let out a heavy breath, shaking her head as she processed the elaborate setup. "Ms. Williams," she said, her tone completely transformed from accusatory to apologetic, "I want to assure you that the anonymous report filed against you holds no merit whatsoever. Based on the overwhelming digital evidence you have just provided, we are officially dropping the investigation into your household, effective immediately. You are providing a safe, exemplary environment for your son." I closed my laptop and folded my hands on the marble counter. But the issue of the injury remains. I stated clearly. My son was left unattended in a hazardous location by a man who is currently petitioning the family court for full emergency custody. The male investigator picked up his clipboard, his expression hardening into a look of absolute legal resolve. "The file on you is closed," he confirmed. "However, we are immediately opening a severe child endangerment case against your ex-husband, Trent. Leaving a minor unattended in a vehicle for 4 hours in a high-risk area is a criminal offense. Adding a coordinated false report to a state agency only elevates the severity of his actions. We will be coordinating with local law enforcement to subpoena the security footage from that parking lot, and we will be paying Trent a visit tonight." They thanked me for my profound cooperation and apologized once more for the intrusion. As I walked them to the front door, I watched them return to their state vehicle, their previous hostility redirected entirely toward the man who thought he could outsmart me. Trent and Sylvia threw their best punch, believing my lack of obvious wealth meant a lack of power. They completely misunderstood the modern battlefield. I did not need expensive lawyers to defend my home today. I only needed data, and data never lies. I locked the front door and walked back into the living room to hug my son, knowing the defensive phase of this war was over. It was finally time to go on the offensive. The next morning began with deceptive calmness. I woke early, preparing breakfast for Leo and organizing my digital files for the upcoming custody battle. I needed to secure the absolute best family law attorney in the state to ensure Trent and his malicious relatives never came near my son again. I poured coffee, opened my secure browser, and navigated to my primary public banking portal. This account held the substantial trust fund my late parents had left me. I initiated a standard wire transfer to cover the hefty legal retainer. A bold red error message instantly flashed across my screen. Transaction denied. Account locked. I blinked at the glaring notification, my pulse quickening for a fraction of a second. A technical glitch was highly unlikely given the elite tier of my wealth management plan. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to my personal wealth manager at the regional bank. The phone rang 3 times before an unfamiliar voice answered, sounding nervous. I calmly requested an explanation for the sudden restriction on my inherited assets. The representative stammered, placing me on a brief hold. When he returned, his tone was completely devoid of its usual polite warmth. He informed me an emergency administrative lock was placed on all my accounts. I demanded to know under what legal authority they could freeze a private trust fund without prior notification or judicial order. The representative hesitated, clearing his throat, before reading from a newly added file note. He stated that a senior vice president of the bank had authorized the freeze late last night. He claimed the bank received a concerning report from a direct family member stating I was experiencing a severe psychotic break. The report alleged I was a catastrophic danger to my own financial well-being. The identity of the senior vice president was not a mystery to me. Sylvia had spent decades climbing the local social ladder, aggressively networking with the regional banking elite. She played golf with the board of directors and hosted lavish charity galas for their executives. Enraged by the spectacular failure of her malicious child protective services trap, she had immediately pivoted to financial warfare. She weaponized her high-level connections to bypass standard banking protocols and illegally freeze my primary accounts. Sylvia fabricated a complete psychological meltdown, painting me as an unhinged, unstable woman, incapable of managing her own life. I ended the call with the bank representative setting my cell phone down on the cold marble counter. The sheer audacity of her illegal maneuver was breathtaking. Sylvia and Trent already knew family court custody battles were incredibly expensive. By cutting off my access to my late parents' trust fund, they calculated they could completely starve me out financially. They assumed I would be unable to hire competent legal representation. They expected me to default on my mortgage, panic completely, and eventually crawl back to them begging for a settlement that involved surrendering full custody of my precious young son. Their strategy was actually quite brilliant if I had been the helpless, dependent woman they always believed me to be. During my marriage to Trent, I deliberately kept my lifestyle modest and my professional accomplishments entirely hidden. They constantly mocked me for working from home, assuming my cybersecurity consulting was just a trivial hobby that barely generated pocket change. They viewed my inherited trust fund as my only financial lifeline. Sylvia arrogantly thought she had just severed my oxygen supply. She thought she had backed a terrified mother into a dark corner, where the only way out was total surrender. Instead of panicking blindly, I felt a cold, calculating smile spread across my face. I walked over to my secure workstation and easily opened a completely different set of encrypted networks. I utilized multiple virtual private networks to access the financial infrastructure of my anonymous limited liability company. The screen loaded quickly, displaying the massive, entirely unrestricted capital I had accumulated through high-level data privacy contracts. The black corporate card I used at the school fundraiser was just the tip of the iceberg. I possessed vast hidden resources that were completely insulated from the traditional banking system Sylvia controlled. Sylvia's blatantly illegal maneuver gave me a massive tactical advantage. By freezing my public trust fund, she had essentially handed me the perfect evidence of financial abuse and corporate corruption. She had forced a senior bank executive to violate strict fiduciary duties based on a malicious lie. When the time came to present this in front of a judge, it would demonstrate a coordinated illegal conspiracy to extort a mother using institutional power. They were digging their own graves with golden shovels, blindly confident in their aristocratic immunity. I decided to let them continue believing they had successfully disarmed me. I needed them to remain arrogant and careless. I transferred the required legal retainer using a secure offshore corporate account, routing it through a masked vendor to completely obscure the origin of the funds. My attorney would be paid in full, and my legal defense would remain absolutely impenetrable. I closed my laptop and poured myself another cup of coffee, feeling a profound sense of peace. The battle lines were now explicitly drawn. They wanted a war of attrition, hoping to break my spirit and drain my endurance. But a mother protecting her child possesses an infinite reserve of stamina. The upcoming weekend was crucial. Sylvia was hosting her annual family barbecue, an event I was strictly banned from attending. Trent would undoubtedly bring Leo to parade him around like a trophy. I knew the toxic family would celebrate their perceived financial victory, loudly mocking my frozen accounts and toasting their impending custody win. But they had a massive fatal blind spot within their ranks. They constantly underestimated and entirely marginalized Vanessa's black husband, DeAndre. They had no idea that their quiet, observant relative was a brilliant forensic accountant, and he was watching their every move. Sylvia hosted her lavish annual spring barbecue on the meticulously manicured back lawn of her sprawling country club estate. The air smelled of expensive grilled meats and blooming hydrangeas. I was expressly forbidden from stepping foot on the property, a ban Sylvia enforced with sheer delight. Trent had picked up Leo that morning for his legally mandated weekend visitation, dragging my son into the heart of their toxic celebration. Leo sat quietly on a stone bench near the edge of the patio, picking at a plate of untouched potato salad. He looked utterly miserable, his small shoulders hunched forward, as he tried to make himself invisible. Trent completely ignored him, preferring to stand by the outdoor bar, with a cocktail in hand, playing the role of the perfect dedicated father for the affluent neighbors who had been invited over to mingle. Sylvia and Vanessa held court under a large white gazebo, sipping chilled white wine and laughing loudly. Their voices carried across the lawn, sharp and intentionally penetrating. They were actively celebrating what they believed was my absolute financial ruin. Sylvia raised her crystal glass, her diamonds glittering in the afternoon sun, toasting to the glorious fact that my trust fund was officially locked down. Vanessa giggled maliciously, loudly, wondering if I was currently scouring the couch cushions for spare change just to afford a cheap frozen dinner. They reveled in my supposed misery, entirely confident that they had successfully checkmated me. They believed their wealth and influence made them untouchable deities in our small suburban universe. A few yards away from the gazebo, standing over the massive stainless steel grill, was Vanessa's husband, DeAndre. He was a highly educated 34-year-old forensic accountant, a man possessing a brilliant analytical mind that spent 5 days a week uncovering complex corporate fraud. Yet at Sylvia's house, he was treated with a suffocating, deeply ingrained condescension. The family constantly subjected him to subtle but sharp microaggressions. Sylvia would routinely bypass the hired catering staff to ask DeAndre to fetch her a fresh drink, or she would make pointed, uncomfortable comments about how articulate he was for someone from his particular background. Vanessa, his own wife, treated him more like an accessory or a hired handyman than an equal partner in their marriage. "DeAndre, make sure you do not char the tenderloin this time," Vanessa called out from the gazebo, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "And be a dear, grab some more ice from the kitchen, the bucket is getting low." DeAndre did not react angrily. He simply nodded, his face a calm, unreadable mask, and continued turning the steaks. He had learned early on that engaging with their toxic prejudice only fueled their narcissistic drama. But beneath his quiet exterior, DeAndre missed absolutely nothing. He observed this family with the precise, calculating eyes of an auditor looking for structural discrepancies in a fraudulent ledger. He knew Sylvia was ruthless and he knew Vanessa was fiercely, deeply insecure, but his primary focus that afternoon was locked entirely on Trent. Trent was putting on a fantastic show for the guests, flashing his signature charismatic smile and talking loudly about his supposedly lucrative executive investments. However, DeAndre noticed the glaring cracks in the facade. Trent was sweating profusely, though the spring air was quite cool. His hands trembled slightly every time he raised his glass to take a drink. More importantly, Trent kept checking his phone with a frantic, almost obsessive compulsion. Every few minutes, the screen would light up, and Trent's jaw would clench so tightly that the muscles twitched. During a span of merely 2 hours, Trent received 4 separate phone calls that caused him to immediately abandon his conversations and literally sprint toward the secluded side of the estate, far away from the guests. DeAndre, pretending to search for extra grilling tongs in the outdoor storage pantry, managed to position himself near the tall hedges where Trent was pacing aggressively. DeAndre listened intently as Trent spoke in hushed, panicked tones, pleading with whoever was on the other end of the line. "I need more time," Trent hissed into the phone, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "The trust fund is frozen. We are getting custody, and then she will have to liquidate it to settle. I just need 1 more month, please. You cannot send them to my office again." DeAndre stood perfectly still behind the thick hedges, his analytical brain rapidly connecting the dark, fragmented pieces of the puzzle. Wealthy, successful business executives did not beg for extra time on the phone while hiding in the bushes. They did not look over their shoulders in sheer terror, and they certainly did not promise to liquidate their ex-wife's inherited trust fund to appease aggressive callers who were threatening to visit their corporate offices. Trent was not a successful businessman experiencing a temporary cash flow issue. Trent was a desperate man drowning in a massive, terrifying ocean of illegal debt. DeAndre stepped back quietly, returning to the grill before anyone noticed his brief absence. He looked over at Sylvia and Vanessa, who were still laughing and drinking, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic financial ruin standing right in their own backyard. They thought they were destroying Lauren to claim a prize, but they were actually participating in a dangerous extortion scheme orchestrated by a man who owed money to very dangerous people. DeAndre looked across the patio at little Leo, who was now hugging his knees, looking so small and vulnerable. DeAndre knew exactly what he had to do. The family had treated him like a secondary citizen for years, ignoring his intellect and dismissing his worth. They had no idea that the quiet black man turning their stakes possessed the exact forensic accounting skills required to completely dismantle their entire empire. DeAndre pulled out his phone, shielding the screen with his body, and began drafting a highly secure, encrypted message to the one person who needed this information the most. The encrypted message DeAndre drafted remained unsent for 2 days. He needed irrefutable proof before approaching a woman fighting a war against his own wife and mother-in-law. When Monday morning arrived, DeAndre walked into his office and locked the glass door behind him. He sat down at his multi-monitor workstation and cracked his knuckles. For 5 years, he had endured the subtle racist jabs, the condescending tones, and the dismissive attitudes of Trent and Sylvia. They constantly paraded their generational wealth and corporate titles as if those things made them superior. DeAndre was tired of the fake superiority. He was tired of watching them crush innocent people under their designer shoes. It was time to pull back the curtain on the Golden family and see what was rotting underneath. As a forensic accountant, DeAndre possessed access to specialized financial tracking software and databases that ordinary citizens did not know existed. He started his investigation by running a background check on Trent and his corporate entities. On the surface, Trent appeared to be a successful vice president of sales. His public tax filings were neat, and his official bank accounts showed a steady income. However, DeAndre knew financial criminals never kept dirty secrets in the primary ledger. He began digging deeper, pulling property records, shell company registrations, and collateralized loan obligations. It took less than 3 hours for the flawless facade to completely disintegrate before his trained eyes. Trent was not a successful executive. He was a spectacular, catastrophic financial failure. DeAndre uncovered a massive black hole of debt that defied logic. Trent had taken out 3 secondary mortgages on his luxury condominium. His expensive sports car was leased and 4 months behind on payments. The most terrifying discovery was the labyrinth of wire transfers moving out of Trent's hidden offshore accounts. DeAndre tracked the digital breadcrumbs following the money as it flowed rapidly into known international gambling syndicates and offshore sports betting platforms. Trent was a severe gambling addict. He was dropping tens of thousands of dollars on a single weekend, hemorrhaging cash faster than he could possibly earn it legally. The situation grew darker when DeAndre analyzed the incoming deposits designed to cover Trent's gambling losses. Trent was receiving erratic wire transfers from suspicious private lending firms holding addresses in strip malls and vacant lots. These were not banks. They were predatory underground loan sharks charging astronomical interest rates. Trent had leveraged his entire life, including his future earnings, to borrow from dangerous men who did not care about corporate titles. The panicked phone calls DeAndre had witnessed at the barbecue suddenly made perfect sense. Trent was not stressed about paying bills. He was facing severe physical threats from violent creditors demanding immediate repayment. DeAndre cross-referenced Sylvia's financial footprint to see if the matriarch was bailing out her golden son. The data revealed that Sylvia was completely tapped out. Her lavish lifestyle and country club spending had drained her liquid assets. She possessed high-value real estate but zero actual cash flow to cover a multi-million-dollar gambling debt. That was why she illegally used her banking connections to freeze the trust fund belonging to Lauren, instead of simply paying off Trent's creditors herself. Sylvia and Trent were drowning in the exact same sinking ship, and they desperately needed an influx of liquid cash to survive the crash. DeAndre sat back in his office chair, the chilling reality washing over him like ice water. The custody battle was never about Leo. Trent possessed zero paternal instinct, and Sylvia viewed her grandson as nothing more than a convenient accessory for holiday photographs. They did not want the boy out of love. They wanted full legal custody of an 8-year-old child solely to weaponize him against a desperate mother. By gaining primary custody, Trent could demand exorbitant monthly child support payments based on the massive assets held within the trust fund. Even more sinister, they planned to use Leo as a hostage to force a desperate settlement. DeAndre realized the truth of their extortion plot. Sylvia and Trent knew Lauren would do anything to keep her son safe. Their ultimate goal was to back her into a legal corner so tight that she would voluntarily liquidate her inherited trust fund to buy them off. They intended to offer her a settlement where she surrendered her wealth in exchange for Trent dropping the fraudulent custody petition. They were literally trying to ransom a child to pay off violent underground bookies. The sheer depravity of the scheme made DeAndre physically nauseous. He had audited ruthless corporate embezzlers and money launderers, but this betrayal was intimately evil. He knew he had to act quickly before Trent's creditors lost patience and the situation escalated into physical violence. DeAndre meticulously downloaded every piece of incriminating financial evidence he had uncovered. He compiled the secondary mortgages, the offshore gambling wire transfers, the predatory loan agreements, and the corresponding dates showing Trent's spiraling insolvency. He encrypted the entire dossier onto a secure flash drive, ensuring the data chain of custody remained pristine for family court presentation. He created an airtight financial profile that no expensive lawyer could ever hope to dismantle or explain away. DeAndre looked at a framed photograph sitting on his desk. It showed him and Vanessa on their wedding day. He had loved his wife once, believing her flaws were from a difficult upbringing. But seeing the data in front of him, knowing Vanessa was actively helping her mother and brother destroy an innocent woman and traumatize a little boy, broke whatever remaining loyalty he held for that toxic family. They had continually looked down on him because of his skin color and his working-class roots. Now, the quiet black man they treated like the help was about to hand their victim the exact weapon she needed to orchestrate their absolute destruction. DeAndre ejected the encrypted drive and reached for his phone to finally send that message. DeAndre's encrypted message arrived on a secure communication app I used primarily for high-level corporate clients. The notification popped up on my secondary monitor, a brief sequence of alphanumeric characters that translated to a time and a set of coordinates. It was an address for a small independent coffee shop located in a completely different county, far away from the manicured lawns and prying eyes of Sylvia's neighborhood. I knew instantly that this was not a casual invitation. The level of operational security employed indicated a matter of extreme sensitivity. I arranged for a trusted neighbor to watch Leo grab my encrypted laptop and drove the 45 minutes to the designated location, my mind racing with possibilities. I walked into the coffee shop, a dimly lit establishment smelling strongly of roasted beans and old paperbacks. The place was mostly empty, save for a few college students hunched over their textbooks. I spotted DeAndre sitting in a booth near the back, partially obscured by a large potted fern. He wore a plain gray hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, a stark contrast to the tailored suits he usually wore to family functions. I slid into the booth across from him, offering a brief nod of acknowledgement. We had never been particularly close, our interactions limited to polite exchanges at tense holiday dinners, where we were both treated as outsiders by the Golden family. DeAndre did not waste time with pleasantries. He reached into his pocket and placed a small black USB drive on the table between us, sliding it across the worn wooden surface until it rested near my hand. "I know what they are trying to do," DeAndre said, his voice low and intense. "And I know why they are doing it. It has absolutely nothing to do with Leo's well-being, Lauren. It is entirely about money." I looked at the USB drive, then back at DeAndre, my expression remaining perfectly neutral. I had suspected their motives were financial, given Sylvia's illegal maneuver with my trust fund, but hearing it confirmed by an insider validated my darkest suspicions. "Tell me," I said, simply picking up the drive and slipping it into my pocket. DeAndre leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "They think I am just a quiet guy who should be endlessly grateful to be married into their family." He began, his tone laced with a quiet, controlled anger. "They treat me like I am invisible, like I am just there to balance out their pristine family photos. But they forgot what I do for a living. I am a forensic accountant, Lauren. I see the numbers they desperately try to hide." He explained how he had noticed Trent's erratic behavior at the recent barbecue, the panicked phone calls, and the desperate attempts to secure more time from unknown callers. DeAndre detailed his subsequent investigation, outlining the massive web of secondary mortgages, depleted accounts, and the terrifying volume of wire transfers flowing into offshore gambling syndicates. "Trent is not a successful executive," DeAndre continued, his eyes locked on mine. "He is functionally bankrupt. But worse than that, he is heavily indebted to predatory underground lenders. These are not banks, Lauren. These are violent men who do not care about corporate titles or country club memberships." The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. The sudden aggressive custody petition, the fabricated Child Protective Services report, the illegal freezing of my trust fund. It was a coordinated, desperate extortion scheme designed to force me to liquidate my inherited wealth to save Trent from his violent creditors. "Trent owes $2 million to the wrong people," DeAndre stated, the gravity of the number hanging heavily in the air between us. "They do not want to raise Leo. They want to use him as a hostage. They plan to gain primary custody, demand exorbitant child support based on your trust fund, and ultimately force you into a settlement where you hand over the cash to pay off Trent's debts." A cold wave of fury washed over me, sharper and more focused than the anger I had felt during the school play ambush. They were willing to weaponize my son, to tear him away from the only stable home he knew, simply to cover Trent's catastrophic gambling addiction. They were willing to place an 8-year-old boy in the crosshairs of violent loan sharks to save their own miserable skins. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, studying DeAndre carefully. "You are married to Vanessa. This information could destroy her family." DeAndre shook his head slowly, a deep sadness crossing his features. "I loved Vanessa," once he admitted quietly. "I thought her flaws were just the result of growing up in that toxic environment. But watching her actively participate in a scheme to destroy an innocent mother and traumatize a little boy, that broke whatever loyalty I had left. They have treated me like a secondary citizen for years because of my background and the color of my skin. They think they are untouchable. I am giving you the exact weapon you need to prove they are not." He pointed to my pocket, indicating the USB drive. "The data on that drive is pristine. I compiled every secondary mortgage, every offshore wire transfer, and every predatory loan agreement. I encrypted it to ensure the chain of custody remains absolute. No expensive lawyer they hire will be able to dismantle or explain away that financial profile. It is airtight." I felt a profound sense of gratitude toward the quiet, observant man sitting across from me. He had risked his own marriage and his standing within that family to do the right thing. He had handed me the tactical nuclear weapon I needed to completely obliterate their extortion plot and secure my son's safety permanently. "Thank you, DeAndre," I said sincerely, my voice thick with emotion. "I will make sure this data is used effectively. They will never touch my son." DeAndre nodded, standing up from the booth and pulling his cap down slightly. "Protect your boy, Lauren," he said softly, before turning and walking out of the coffee shop, disappearing into the afternoon shadows. I sat alone in the booth for a few moments longer, my hand resting over the pocket containing the USB drive. The defensive phase of this war was officially over. With DeAndre's explosive financial dossier in my possession, I was fully prepared to launch a devastating counteroffensive that would leave Trent and Sylvia with absolutely nowhere to hide. I drove back to my house with the encrypted USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. The moment I walked through the front door, I locked the deadbolt and went straight to my home office. I plugged the drive into my secure workstation and bypassed the heavy encryption layers DeAndre had implemented. The financial documents populated across my dual monitors, painting a picture of absolute devastation. Trent was completely buried in illegal debt. The offshore wire transfers and predatory loan agreements were meticulously cataloged. I spent the next 4 hours cross-referencing the data with public records and structuring an impenetrable legal strategy. I was building a digital fortress that would obliterate Trent and Sylvia in family court. I checked the time and saw it was getting late. I walked down the hall to check on Leo. He was sleeping peacefully in his bed, his small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I pulled the blanket up over his shoulders and brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. He was my entire world, and I was willing to burn down the entire Golden family to keep him safe. I returned to my office and began drafting an urgent brief for my attorney attaching the heavily redacted financial summaries. Just as I hit send on the encrypted email, a violent, aggressive pounding echoed from my front door. The heavy thuds shook the door frame, shattering the quiet sanctuary of my home. I glanced at the live feed from my exterior security cameras and felt my stomach drop. 2 marked police cruisers were parked at irregular angles on my driveway, their red and blue lights flashing silently into the dark neighborhood. 4 uniformed police officers stood on my porch. Standing directly behind them, illuminated by the harsh glare of the porch light, were Trent and Sylvia. Trent was putting on the performance of a lifetime. He ran his hands through his hair, looking frantically distressed and playing the role of a terrified, desperate father. Sylvia stood beside him with her hands clasped tightly over her chest, projecting the image of a deeply concerned grandmother. I did not panic. I closed my laptop, smoothed my sweater, and walked to the front door. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door wide, meeting the gaze of the lead officer with absolute calm. "Ma, and we need you to step back," the lead officer commanded, his hand resting cautiously on his utility belt. "We received an emergency call regarding an imminent kidnapping threat involving a minor. We need to secure the premises and locate the child immediately. I stepped back slowly, keeping my hands visible and open. My son is asleep in his bedroom down the hall. I stated clearly, my voice unwavering. There is no kidnapping threat here. I am his primary custodial parent and we are simply resting in our own home. Trent pushed his way past the officers, his face twisted into a mask of manufactured panic. She is lying, he shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at me. She is planning to take Leo and flee the state tonight. She knows she is losing the custody battle, and she is trying to run away with my son. The lead officer held up a stack of printed papers. Mr. Williams provided us with digital evidence, the officer explained, holding the pages toward me. He received multiple text messages from your verified phone number this evening stating you were emptying your accounts, taking the boy, and disappearing across state lines. Given the active custody dispute, we are required to treat this as an emergency flight risk and potential parental abduction. I looked at the printed screenshots. The messages were perfectly formatted to look like they came from my phone. They contained phrases I would use and referenced specific details about Leo routine. It was a highly sophisticated spoofing job. Vanessa had clearly used her extensive budget to hire someone skilled enough to fake the caller ID routing, creating a flawless digital illusion of a frantic mother planning to kidnap her own child. They had orchestrated this entire late-night raid to establish a police record of me being a dangerous flight risk. This is a fabricated digital spoof, I told the officer calmly, maintaining direct eye contact. I am a cybersecurity professional. I can prove those messages did not originate from my device or my network. My son is asleep and my car has been parked in the driveway all evening. The officer looked skeptical, but signaled for his partner to check the bedroom. While two officers walked down the hallway to visually confirm Leo was safe in his bed, the lead officer asked Trent to step back onto the porch to take a formal statement. This left Sylvia standing just inside my foyer, temporarily out of earshot of the police. Sylvia seized the moment instantly. She slithered close to me, her expensive perfume masking the pure venom in her presence. Her face dropped, the concerned grandmother act transforming into a chilling, ruthless sneer. You really thought you could outsmart us? Sylvia whispered, her voice a low, terrifying hiss that barely disturbed the air between us. You have until tomorrow morning to sign over full physical custody to Trent and voluntarily release the funds in your trust account. If you try to fight us, I will submit heavily documented psychiatric records to the court. I stared at her, my expression remaining completely blank. I have a fully authenticated medical file proving you suffer from severe untreated schizophrenia. Sylvia continued, leaning in closer, so I could see the absolute malice in her eyes. The file details your violent psychotic breaks and your profound detachment from reality. When the judge sees those records combined with this police report of your attempted kidnapping, you will not just lose Leo. You will be institutionalized in a locked psychiatric facility for a very long time. She smiled, a thin, bloodless smile. You are a jobless nobody facing a respected executive and his wealthy family. No one will ever believe you over the medical experts I have already paid off. Give us the trust fund and walk away, or I will ensure you spend the next 10 years in a padded room while Trent raises your son. The officers returned to the foyer, announcing that Leo was indeed asleep and safe. Sylvia instantly snapped back into character, stepping away from me and letting out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief. She pressed a hand to her chest and thanked the officers profusely for keeping her precious grandson safe from danger. I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl accusations at Sylvia or Trent in front of the police. I calmly provided the officers with my identification, answered their procedural questions, and allowed them to file their preliminary report. I knew screaming about forged medical documents would only make me look like the unhinged, paranoid woman Sylvia was actively trying to portray. Instead, I simply memorized every single word Sylvia had whispered to me. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner with their fabricated text messages and the threat of fake psychiatric records. They believed their wealth could buy any truth they desired. But as the police escorted Trent and Sylvia off my property and drove away into the night, I locked my door and smiled. Sylvia had just handed me the exact coordinates of her illegal activities, and I was going to use my cybersecurity skills to trace those forged medical records straight back to her bank accounts. The morning brought a completely different kind of invasion. I woke early, poured coffee, and sat at my secure workstation. I planned to immediately begin tracing Sylvia and her fabricated psychiatric records. However, my phone began vibrating continuously on the kitchen counter. A barrage of notifications flooded my screen. I found dozens of missed calls and text messages from casual acquaintances. One message from a fellow mother contained a link to a private Facebook group asking if I was okay. I clicked the link and my stomach dropped instantly. Vanessa and Sylvia had launched a highly coordinated character assassination campaign across every local platform. In neighborhood groups and school forums, they posted identical crafted statements, designed as desperate pleas for help from a terrified grandmother and aunt. They painted a horrifying picture, claiming, "I suffered from severe mental illness," and attempted to kidnap Leo last night. Vanessa attached edited photographs of police cruisers parked outside my house using flashing lights as visual proof of instability. Her post described me as a volatile, dangerous woman detached from reality. She warned parents to keep children away, claiming I was a flight risk. Sylvia commented on every post playing the heartbroken matriarch. She typed agonizing paragraphs about how Trent was fighting to rescue his boy from a completely unhinged mother. The smear campaign was psychological manipulation at its finest. By sunrise, the posts generated hundreds of horrified reactions from the local community. Parents I had known for years were publicly expressing shock and offering prayers. The digital mob convicted me before breakfast. Sylvia and Vanessa successfully weaponized the entire neighborhood against me, isolating me to break my spirit before court. The true devastation of their warfare hit me an hour later when I drove Leo to Oak Ridge Elementary. Normally, morning drop-off was friendly. Today, the atmosphere was toxic as I walked Leo toward the entrance. Mothers physically pulled their children closer. Groups of parents stopped talking, their eyes tracking my movement with blatant suspicion and fear. Nobody waved. Nobody smiled. The collective silence was deafening. I kept my posture straight and expression neutral, refusing to let them see me sweat. I kissed Leo on the forehead, wished him a wonderful day, and watched him walk into his classroom. The moment I turned around, whispers began. I walked back to my car with my head held high, ignoring the blatant stares. The social isolation was absolute. By that afternoon, the collateral damage began to directly impact my son. My phone chimed with a message from the mother of Leo's best friend. She abruptly canceled their weekend playdate, citing a vague family emergency. Within 2 hours, 3 more parents canceled upcoming birthday party invitations and sleepovers. They cut Leo off entirely to avoid any association with me. When I picked Leo up from school, the change in his demeanor was heartbreakingly obvious. My normally bright 8-year-old climbed into my car in complete silence. He stared out the window, his small shoulders slumped forward. I asked him how his day went, and he simply shrugged, refusing to meet my eyes. When we got home, he walked straight to his bedroom and closed the door. I gave him a few minutes of space before entering his room. Leo was sitting on the edge of his bed, hugging his knees tightly to his chest. He looked up at me, his brown eyes filled with a profound sadness that shattered my heart. He asked me why his friends were suddenly not allowed to play with him. He asked if he had done something wrong at school. He asked why the other kids were whispering about our family during recess. The sheer cruelty of Trent, Sylvia, and Vanessa became undeniable. They claimed they wanted to protect Leo, but they were actively traumatizing him to win a court case. They were willing to destroy his friendships and his sense of security, just to punish me. I sat down next to him on the bed and wrapped my arms tightly around his small frame. I had to act as his absolute emotional anchor, while privately navigating the intense public humiliation of my life. I pulled him close, resting my chin on top of his head. I did not speak poorly of his father or his grandmother. I refused to sink to their toxic level and poison his mind. Instead, I focused entirely on his safety and our unbreakable bond. I told him that sometimes adults get confused and say things that are not true, but it had nothing to do with him. I assured him that he was deeply loved, that he was a wonderful friend, and that the strange behavior of the other kids was just a temporary misunderstanding. I promised him that we were a team, and no matter how confusing the world outside our house became, he would always be completely safe with me. Leo buried his face in my sweater, his small hands gripping the fabric tightly. He cried quietly for a few minutes, releasing the tension he had carried all day. Rocked him gently, humming a soft tune, until his breathing slowed and his shoulders relaxed. I stayed with him until the sadness in his eyes was replaced by a sleepy peace. I knew I had to remain his fortress. I would absorb every single ounce of their vicious social media venom so he would not have to. I tucked him under his warm blankets, kissed his cheek, and turned off the light. As I closed his door, the mother retreated, and the cybersecurity expert stepped forward. The time for enduring their attacks was finally over. I held Leo until his tears finally stopped soaking my sweater. The room was quiet, save for his slightly ragged breathing. I knew this was a critical moment. It would be incredibly easy, and arguably justified, to tell him exactly what his father and grandmother were doing. I could explain the lies, the manipulation, and the greed that drove their actions. But I also knew the profound psychological damage that parental alienation inflicts on a child. Trent was a toxic, absentee father, but he was still Leo's father. Destroying that image forcefully would only traumatize Leo further, forcing him to carry adult burdens he was far too young to understand. I had to protect his innocence while simultaneously preparing him to survive the incoming storm. I pulled back, slightly smoothing his messy hair and looking directly into his brown eyes. "Leo," I began, my voice steady and gentle. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Sometimes adults get scared or confused, and they do things that do not make sense. Sometimes they say things that are not true because they think it will help them win a fight. But no matter what anyone says, no matter how loud the world outside this house gets you, and I know the truth." He sniffled, rubbing his eyes. "What is the truth, Mom?" "The truth is that you are the most important thing in my life," I said, emphasizing every word. "The truth is that I love you more than anything, and I will always, always protect you. We are a team, Leo. We know our home is safe, we know we take care of each other, and we know that nobody can change that truth, even if they tell lies. Do you understand?" He nodded slowly, a small measure of relief replacing the deep sadness in his expression. I kissed his forehead again, tucking his blankets snugly around him. I told him to rest, promising that tomorrow would be a better day, and that I would handle the people who were telling lies. I stayed by his side until his breathing deepened into the rhythmic cadence of sleep. I watched him for a few minutes longer, memorizing the peaceful curve of his cheek. This was what I was fighting for. This innocent, beautiful child who deserved a life free from extortion and manipulation. I stood up, quietly closed his bedroom door, and walked down the hallway toward my home office. The mother had provided comfort. Now the cybersecurity expert needed to prepare for war. I locked my office door, sat down at my multi-monitor workstation, and cracked my knuckles. The emotional exhaustion of the day vanished, replaced by a cold, hyper-focused adrenaline. Trent and Sylvia had escalated their attack by utilizing digital fabrication. They had submitted forged psychiatric records and spoofed text messages to the police, believing their wealth and status made their evidence unquestionable. They assumed I was just a freelance consultant with basic computer skills. They had no idea they had just initiated a digital war with a woman who designed secure data architecture for international corporations. I started with the doctored text messages Trent had shown the police. Spoofing a phone number to send fake messages is relatively simple, but it always leaves a digital trail if you know where to look. I accessed my cellular provider's raw data logs, bypassing the consumer interface to pull the actual signaling system records for my device. I cross-referenced the timestamps of the supposed kidnapping text Trent received. My logs proved definitively that my device never pinged the cellular towers during that time frame, nor did it transmit any SMS packets matching the content Trent provided. Next, I needed to identify the origin of the spoofed messages. I utilized a specialized packet sniffer tool I had developed for a previous corporate client scanning for anomalous routing data linked to Trent's number during that specific window. It took less than an hour to isolate the source. The fake text had originated from a burner application hosted on a server located in Eastern Europe. However, the application required a paid subscription to utilize the advanced spoofing features. I traced the payment gateway associated with the burner account. The transaction had been processed using a prepaid Visa gift card, but the IP address used to activate and load the gift card was distinctly local. I pinged the IP address, tracing it back to an upscale coffee shop located exactly 2 blocks from Vanessa's house. The timestamp on the IP activation matched a period when Vanessa had posted a photo of her latte on Instagram from that exact location. She had literally documented her location while committing a federal cybercrime. With the spoofed texts dismantled, I turned my attention to the more dangerous threat, the forged psychiatric records Sylvia claimed to possess. Forging medical documents is significantly more complex than spoofing text messages. It requires specific medical terminology, correct formatting, and authentic-looking physician signatures. I knew Sylvia was arrogant, but she was not a medical professional. She had to have purchased those documents from a third party. I opened a secure encrypted browser and accessed the dark web forums known for trafficking in forged documentation. I deployed an automated scraping script, searching for keywords related to psychiatric evaluations, my specific geographic region, and the formatting styles of major local healthcare providers. I cross-referenced the search with cryptocurrency ledgers, looking for transactions matching the typical cost of high-quality forged medical records within the last month. The search yielded a hit within 45 minutes. A vendor specializing in customized medical documents had completed a transaction exactly 3 weeks ago, right around the time Trent filed the emergency custody petition. The vendor required payment in Bitcoin. I utilized a blockchain analysis tool tracing the movement of the Bitcoin from the vendor's wallet backward through the decentralized ledger. I followed the digital breadcrumbs as the cryptocurrency moved through various tumblers designed to obscure its origin. It was a tedious, meticulous process, requiring intense concentration to untangle the deliberate obfuscation. But I am exceptionally good at my job. I successfully traced the initial purchase of the Bitcoin to a centralized cryptocurrency exchange platform. The exchange required Know Your Customer (KYC) verification for account creation. Through a legally gray maneuver involving a minor exploit I had discovered months ago, I accessed the exchange's encrypted metadata. The account used to purchase the Bitcoin, which was then used to buy my forged psychiatric records, was registered under Sylvia's name utilizing her personal email address and linked directly to her primary checking account. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the undeniable proof displayed across my monitors. Sylvia had used her own bank account to fund a dark web transaction to purchase fabricated medical documents. Vanessa had used a traceable IP address to spoof kidnapping threats. They were sloppy, arrogant, and entirely ignorant of how digital forensics actually worked. I spent the next 3 hours compiling the data into a comprehensive, irrefutable digital dossier. I extracted the IP logs, the blockchain transaction records, the cellular signaling data, and the corresponding timestamps. I encrypted the entire package and sent it securely to my attorney. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 4 a.m. The final custody hearing was scheduled for later that morning. Trent, Sylvia, and Vanessa were likely sleeping soundly, dreaming of their impending victory and the vast wealth they planned to extort from me. They believed they had constructed an inescapable trap, They did not realize I had just meticulously unraveled every single thread of their conspiracy, transforming their fabricated evidence into a legally binding confession of their own criminal actions. I shut down my workstation and walked to the window, watching the first light of dawn begin to break over the quiet neighborhood. I was ready. The few hours before the final custody hearing moved with strange accelerated clarity. I showered dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected professionalism without screaming for attention, and prepared a hearty breakfast for Leo. I arranged for my trusted neighbor to take him to school, keeping him insulated from the impending legal explosion. After kissing his cheek and promising him a special dinner, I gathered my encrypted laptop and drove toward the downtown family court district. The morning traffic crawled, but my pulse remained perfectly steady. I pulled into the parking garage, feeling the heavy weight of the encrypted dossier resting securely on my hard drive. Walking toward the imposing stone columns of the courthouse, I braced myself for the visual assault I knew was waiting. They did not disappoint Trent. Sylvia and Vanessa were holding court in the marble lobby, making a deliberate spectacle of their arrival. They strode through the security checkpoint like royalty inspecting subjects. Trent wore a custom-tailored Italian suit that cost more than my first car, his hair slicked back to project the image of an untouchable corporate titan. Sylvia was draped in aggressive luxury, sporting a white designer dress and a heavy pearl necklace, chosen to communicate absolute financial superiority. Vanessa walked behind them, clutching a designer handbag and wearing a deeply smug expression. Flanking this toxic trio was a team of 4 high-priced attorneys carrying thick leather briefcases and exuding corporate intimidation. They laughed loudly, performing their absolute confidence for anyone watching. I stood quietly near the heavy wooden doors of Courtroom 4, holding only my laptop and a single manila folder. My attorney, David Bennett, stood beside me. David was a brilliant but entirely unassuming man who favored rumpled tweed jackets over aggressive power suits. He possessed a quiet, calculating intellect that perfectly matched my own data-driven strategy. When Sylvia spotted me standing alone with my modest legal representation, her eyes lit up with sheer predatory delight. She nudged Trent and pointed in my direction, leaning in to whisper something that made them both chuckle maliciously. They genuinely believed I was walking into a slaughter. They looked at my single laptop and saw weakness, entirely ignorant of the digital nuclear arsenal locked behind my passwords. I met Trent's arrogant gaze across the lobby and offered a polite razor-thin smile. His smirk widened fully, convinced he was about to rip my son from my arms and extort my trust fund. The wooden doors swung open, and the bailiff ushered us into the sterile environment of the courtroom. The space smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Trent and his legal army occupied the entire plaintiff table, spreading out mountains of physical documents to visually dominate the space. David and I took our seats at the defense table, setting up my laptop with quiet efficiency. The side door opened and Judge Rosalind stepped up to the bench. She was a 55-year-old veteran of the family court system, possessing piercing dark eyes and a reputation for having zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. She adjusted her glasses, surveyed the unbalanced tables with a sharp, calculating gaze, and struck her gavel. Judge Rosalind called the session to order, her voice cutting through the remaining whispers like a surgical blade. Trent leaned back in his expensive leather chair, crossing his arms like a conqueror claiming his spoils. He whispered to his lead attorney, who nodded vigorously, arranging a massive stack of highly fabricated evidence files. Sylvia sat directly behind him, positioning herself perfectly to ensure the judge would see her calculated performance as a devastated grandmother. Vanessa sat next to her mother, vibrating with toxic anticipation, ready to deliver her rehearsed perjury on the witness stand. They were treating this serious legal proceeding like a theatrical stage play, completely oblivious to the digital execution I had prepared for them. Judge Rosalind did not look amused by their aggressive posturing. She was known as a jurist who despised wealthy litigants trying to buy their way through family court. She opened the case file and scanned the preliminary motions, her expression hardening into a look of absolute professional scrutiny. "We are here regarding the emergency custody petition filed by the plaintiff," she announced, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "The court acknowledges the severe nature of the allegations, including assertions of flight risk and psychological instability. The court also notes the presence of multiple legal representatives for the plaintiff. I expect this proceeding to be conducted with strict adherence to factual evidence, not emotional manipulation. Do we understand each other?" Counsel, Trent's lead attorney, stood up, offering a slick, practiced smile. "Absolutely, Your Honor. We are fully prepared to present irrefutable evidence demonstrating the defendant is entirely unfit to maintain physical or legal custody of the minor child. We will prove she poses a danger to his physical safety and well-being." Judge Rosalind turned her piercing gaze toward my side of the room, looking at David, then directly at me. I did not flinch, maintaining respectful, unwavering eye contact, projecting the exact calm stability they accused me of lacking. "Is the defense ready to proceed?" she asked, her tone remaining strictly professional. David stood buttoning his tweed jacket. "Yes, Your Honor, the defense is ready. We will present digital evidence that categorically dismantles every allegation brought forth by the plaintiff. Today we will demonstrate the actual truth." Trent scoffed audibly from his table, rolling his eyes at David's assertion. Sylvia let out a theatrical sigh from the gallery, shaking her head as if burdened by my delusion. They were completely drunk on their own arrogance, believing purchased lies were bulletproof. As I booted up my laptop, the screen glowing brightly against dim courtroom lighting, I felt profound peace. They thought these doors locked me inside a cage with them. They did not understand I was the one who locked the doors. They were trapped and about to lose everything. Judge Rosalind instructed the plaintiff to begin their opening arguments. Trent's lead attorney, a slick man with a booming voice designed for theatrical intimidation, stood up and immediately launched his offensive. He paced in front of the judge's bench, weaving a cruel narrative about a deeply unstable mother spiraling completely out of control. He painted Trent as a desperate father trying to rescue his son from a dangerous environment. To anchor this story, the attorney dramatically produced a stack of printed documents and submitted them into evidence as Exhibit A. These were the doctored text messages Trent used to orchestrate the police raid. The attorney read the fake messages aloud, emphasizing the frantic tone Vanessa had carefully crafted when she spoofed my phone number. He highlighted the text where I supposedly threatened to empty my accounts, kidnap Leo, and disappear across state lines. The attorney paused after reading, allowing the fabricated threat of child abduction to echo heavily off the polished wooden walls. Trent sat at his table wearing a perfectly practiced expression of paternal anguish. He bowed his head, resting his face in his hands, performing the role of a terrified father pushed to the absolute brink. The attorney then transitioned smoothly to his second phase of attack, pulling a sealed medical folder from his expensive briefcase. He submitted it as Exhibit B, announcing it contained my recent highly confidential psychiatric evaluations. I watched his mouth move, listening as he unleashed the exact lies Sylvia had threatened me with in my foyer. The attorney read the forged medical conclusions to the judge, claiming I had been secretly diagnosed with severe untreated schizophrenia. He described terrifying, completely fictional episodes of violent psychotic breaks and profound detachment from reality. He argued that these severe mental health issues made me fundamentally incapable of providing a safe, stable home for a young child, insisting that my continued physical custody of Leo represented a catastrophic and immediate danger. Judge Rosalind examined the submitted documents with a hard, unreadable expression. She adjusted her glasses, scrutinizing the official-looking medical letterheads and the signatures of the fake physicians Sylvia had purchased from the dark web. The documents looked incredibly authentic, designed specifically to withstand basic judicial scrutiny. The attorney concluded his initial presentation by stating they had a primary witness ready to corroborate the severe decline in my mental state and validate the terrifying environment I allegedly forced my son to endure. He proudly called Vanessa to the witness stand. Vanessa stood up from the gallery, smoothing her designer skirt, and walked toward the front of the courtroom. She raised her right hand, swearing under oath to tell the absolute truth, committing blatant felony perjury without a single ounce of hesitation. She sat down in the witness box, gripping the edges of the wooden enclosure, as if she needed physical support to recount her harrowing experiences. Her performance was masterfully toxic. The attorney began his direct examination, asking her to describe her relationship with me and her observations of my parenting over the past several months. Vanessa took a deep, trembling breath, expertly summoning tears that pooled in her eyes before spilling down her carefully contoured cheeks. She testified that she had visited my home frequently, out of deep concern for her beloved nephew. She spun a horrifying, entirely fictional tale of finding my house littered with garbage, claiming there was never any fresh food in the refrigerator, and that Leo was constantly wearing dirty, unwashed clothes. Vanessa wept as she told the judge how I would lock myself in my home office for days at a time, completely ignoring my son, while engaging in paranoid, erratic behavior. She lied under oath about hearing me scream at invisible people, claiming I suffered from terrifying delusions that left little Leo cowering in his bedroom. She clutched a tissue, dabbing her eyes delicately as she described Trent begging me to get professional psychological help, only for me to supposedly react with violent screaming rage. I sat perfectly still at the defense table, my hands resting lightly on the keyboard of my laptop. I did not shake my head. I did not object, and I did not show a single fraction of the boiling fury surging through my veins. David remained equally composed beside me, taking diligent notes on a legal pad as Vanessa continued weaving her intricate web of perjury. She testified about the night of the supposed kidnapping attempt, claiming I had called her in a manic state, threatening to drive my car into a river with Leo inside if Trent tried to take him away. She sobbed openly, now begging Judge Rosalind to grant Trent full emergency custody before I caused irreparable fatal harm to an innocent little boy. From my peripheral vision, I watched Sylvia observing her daughter's performance from the gallery. Sylvia sat perfectly straight, her hands clasped elegantly in her lap. She nodded sympathetically along with Vanessa's testimony, projecting the exact image of a heartbroken grandmother watching her family suffer through a tragedy. Beneath that polished exterior, Sylvia radiated an intense, toxic smugness. She was absolutely confident that their generational wealth, their aggressive legal team, and their coordinated lies had effectively destroyed my credibility. She looked at me sitting quietly at the defense table and mistook my strategic silence for defeat. Sylvia genuinely believed they had won. She believed the forged medical records were impenetrable. She believed the spoofed text messages had sealed my fate as a flight risk. She believed the judge was completely buying their orchestrated narrative. The Golden family sat in that courtroom absolutely certain I was a ruined, helpless woman about to lose her only child. They had no idea I was letting them dig their legal graves as deep as possible before I buried them alive. I just needed Trent's lawyer to finish his performance so I could permanently dismantle their entire empire with my digital evidence. Soon the judge would see exactly who was telling the truth. David stood up, adjusting his glasses. He did not raise his voice or attempt to match the theatrical outrage of Trent's attorney. Your Honor, the defense will now present its case. I request permission for my client to project her digital evidence onto the court monitors. Judge Rosalind nodded. Proceed. I pressed a button on my laptop and the large screens mounted on the walls of the courtroom flickered to life. The displays previously blank now showed a clean, meticulously organized dashboard. We have heard a very compelling, very emotional story today. David began pacing slowly in front of the judge's bench. The plaintiff has presented text messages and medical records that paint my client as a dangerous, unstable individual. However, stories can be fabricated. Emotions can be performed. Data, on the other hand, is immutable. I clicked the first file on my dashboard. The screens displayed the raw signaling system records I had extracted from my cellular provider. "Let us begin with the text messages," David said, gesturing to the screens. The plaintiff claims these messages containing threats of kidnapping were sent from my client's phone. The data on the screen represents the raw, unalterable communication logs from my client's cellular provider for the exact time frame in question. Judge Rosalind leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized the complex data tables. "As you can clearly see," David continued, "there are 0 SMS packets originating from my client's device during that period. Her phone did not ping a single cell tower. Those messages were never sent from her phone." Trent's lawyer scoffed. "Your Honor, technical glitches happen. This proves nothing." Perhaps, David countered smoothly. "But we went a step further. We traced the origin of those messages." I clicked the next file. The screens now displayed the IP logs and the payment gateway trace I had painstakingly uncovered. The messages were sent using a burner application hosted on a foreign server, David explained. This application requires a paid subscription. The payment was processed using a prepaid gift card. He paused for effect, letting the information settle over the courtroom. The IP address used to activate that gift card and purchase the burner subscription was traced to a specific coffee shop, David said. A coffee shop located exactly 2 blocks from the residence of Vanessa Williams, the plaintiff's sister. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in the witness box, her previous tears suddenly forgotten. She glanced nervously at her mother in the gallery. Furthermore, David added, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "The timestamp of that IP activation perfectly matches a social media post made by Vanessa Williams from that exact location." I brought up the Instagram photo Vanessa had posted, a latte art picture with the coffee shop's geotag and a timestamp that aligned perfectly with the criminal activity. The courtroom was dead silent. Sylvia's smug expression had vanished entirely, replaced by a look of dawning horror. Trent sat frozen, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "But what about the medical records?" Trent's lawyer demanded, his booming voice losing some of its confidence. "The psychiatric evaluation clearly states she is unstable." "Ah, yes. The psychiatric evaluation," David said, turning his attention back to the screens. "Your Honor, forging medical documents is a serious offense. We decided to investigate the origin of Exhibit B." I opened the folder containing the dark web cryptocurrency transactions and the blockchain analysis. The screens filled with complex transactional graphs and ledger entries. "My client is a highly specialized cybersecurity consultant," David explained to the judge. "She utilized her professional expertise to trace the origins of these medical records. The documents were purchased from a known vendor on the dark web who specializes in fabricating medical histories." Trent's lawyer stood up quickly. "Objection. This is highly irregular and unsubstantiated." "Overruled," Judge Rosalind said sharply. "Continue, counselor. The transaction was completed using cryptocurrency," David stated. "My client successfully traced the blockchain ledger backward, unraveling the deliberate obfuscation techniques used to hide the origin of the funds." I brought up the final slide in this sequence. It showed the centralized cryptocurrency exchange platform and the redacted metadata I had legally obtained. The account used to purchase the cryptocurrency, which was then used to buy the forged medical records, David announced, his voice echoing in the silent room, was registered under the name of Sylvia Williams. He let that sink in. It was linked directly to her personal email address and funded by her primary checking account. The silence that followed was deafening. It was not the silence of shock, but the silence of absolute catastrophic ruin. Sylvia, sitting in the gallery, looked as though all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Her meticulously maintained image of wealthy respectability was disintegrating in real time. Vanessa sat frozen in the witness box, staring at the screens with wide, panicked eyes. Trent's lead attorney slowly sat down, staring blankly at the table. The mountain of physical documents he had brought suddenly looked like a pile of useless paper. He was a smart man. He knew exactly what was happening. He was watching his entire case and his client's freedom evaporate before his eyes. Your Honor. David concluded, his tone resolute. The evidence before you proves that the text messages were spoofed by the plaintiff's sister and the medical records were forged using funds provided by the plaintiff's mother. This entire custody petition is built on a foundation of deliberate, coordinated fraud and perjury. Judge Rosalind looked from the screens to Trent, then to Vanessa, and finally to Sylvia in the gallery. Her expression was a terrifying mask of judicial fury. Counselor, she said to Trent's lawyer, her voice dangerously quiet. Do you have any explanation for the digital evidence just presented? Trent's lawyer opened his mouth, closed it, and looked helplessly at his client. Your Honor, we would need time to review these findings. Time is a luxury you do not currently possess, Judge Rosalind snapped. I sat quietly at the defense table, my hands resting in my lap. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply watched as the Golden family realized the inescapable reality of their situation. The digital execution was complete. The forged weapons they had brought to destroy me were now tightly wrapped around their own necks. But the true devastation was yet to come. The financial motive behind their desperate crimes was still waiting to be revealed. The crushing weight of the digital evidence hung in the air, a physical manifestation of the perjury and fraud that had just been exposed. But I was not finished. I had dismantled their fabricated attacks. Now it was time to reveal the true terrifying motive behind their desperate custody petition. I needed the judge to understand that this was not merely a malicious family dispute, but a coordinated extortion scheme driven by catastrophic illegal debt. David nodded to me, signaling it was time to deploy the final, most devastating phase of our defense. Your Honor, David said, his voice steady and resolute. We have demonstrated that the plaintiff and his family fabricated evidence to portray my client as unfit. The question the court must now ask is why? Why go to such extreme criminal lengths to gain custody of an 8-year-old child? Trent's lead attorney, still visibly reeling from the revelation of the forged medical records, attempted a feeble objection. Your Honor, motives are speculative. The plaintiff simply wants what is best for his son. Judge Rosalind silenced him with a single sharp look. Sit down, counselor. I am extremely interested in the defense's answer to that question. Proceed. David turned toward the monitors. I clicked the next file, and the screens transitioned from cryptocurrency ledgers to a complex, terrifyingly detailed financial map. It was the forensic accounting dossier DeAndre had provided, tracing the flow of Trent's money over the past 3 years. Your Honor, David explained, directing the judge's attention to the screens. The plaintiff has presented himself as a highly successful corporate executive capable of providing a superior, stable life for his son. The data we are about to present paints a very different, highly alarming picture. I zoomed in on the first section of the financial map. This is a summary of the plaintiff's current legitimate financial standing, David stated. As you can see, his primary residence is currently burdened by 3 secondary mortgages, all taken out within the last 18 months. His luxury vehicles are heavily leveraged, and his primary savings accounts are virtually empty. Trent's face turned an ashen shade of gray. He gripped the edge of his table, his knuckles turning white. He knew exactly what was coming next. Being over-leveraged is not a crime, Your Honor, Trent's attorney argued, sounding increasingly desperate. Many successful individuals carry significant debt. This is not ordinary consumer debt, David countered sharply. I clicked to the next slide, revealing the labyrinth of offshore wire transfers. The screens filled with lists of rapid, high-volume transactions moving money out of Trent's accounts. These records, legally obtained and verified, show a consistent pattern of massive, erratic wire transfers. David continued. The funds are being routed to international accounts located in jurisdictions known for hosting unregulated gambling syndicates and offshore sports betting platforms. The plaintiff is not investing. He is hemorrhaging hundreds of thousands of dollars to cover severe gambling losses. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sylvia, who had been sitting rigidly in the gallery, suddenly leaned forward, her eyes locked on the screens in sheer disbelief. She had known Trent was in trouble, but the staggering volume of the losses displayed before her seemed to shatter her remaining composure. I clicked to the final most damning section of the financial map. This slide detailed the incoming deposits designed to cover the offshore losses, the predatory loans DeAndre had uncovered. When the legitimate credit lines dried up, David explained, his voice taking on a grim tone. The plaintiff turned to alternative funding sources. These incoming wire transfers originate from private lending firms with highly suspicious operational structures. Our analysis indicates these entities are front companies for illegal predatory loan operations. David paused, letting the severity of the accusations settle over the room. The plaintiff is not just bankrupt. He owes upwards of $2 million to violent underground creditors who are actively demanding repayment. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The meticulously crafted image of the Golden family had been completely obliterated, replaced by the terrifying reality of a desperate man drowning in illegal debt. This custody petition was never about the welfare of Leo Williams, David stated, looking directly at Trent. It was a calculated, desperate extortion plot. The plaintiff and his family knew my client possesses a significant inherited trust fund. By gaining primary physical custody of the child, they intended to demand exorbitant child support payments, or worse, use the child as leverage to force my client into a financial settlement that would liquidate her assets to pay off these dangerous loan sharks. Trent's legal team descended into complete chaos. The lead attorney was furiously whispering to Trent, his face flushed with anger and panic. They had taken this case believing they were representing a wealthy executive in a standard custody dispute. They now realized they had been manipulated into facilitating a criminal extortion scheme, and their own professional reputations were suddenly on the line. In the gallery, the realization of her impending ruin finally hit Sylvia. The smug, untouchable matriarch was gone. She was staring at the screens, her breath coming in short, erratic gasps. The evidence I had presented did not just destroy Trent. It linked her directly to the purchase of forged medical records on the dark web. As a senior vice president at a regional bank, her career was built on absolute financial integrity and regulatory compliance. The moment the bank's board of directors caught wind of these federal cybercrimes, she would not just be fired. She would be facing decades in federal prison. Her banking career, her social status, her entire pristine life evaporated in that sterile courtroom. Vanessa sat beside her mother, completely frozen. The reality of her own perjury and her role in the spoofed kidnapping texts seemed to finally penetrate her toxic arrogance. They had all believed they were so much smarter, so much more powerful than me. They had blindly walked into a digital execution, and now there was absolutely nowhere left to run. The courtroom's silence shattered as a wooden chair scraped violently against the floor. Trent sprang to his feet, his face a mask of rage. He slammed his fists onto the table, ignoring his lead attorney's warnings. Trent's facade evaporated, exposing the desperate animal underneath. He pointed a shaking finger at me, gasping for air. "This is a lie," Trent screamed. "She is a professional hacker. She fabricated all this digital garbage. She hacked my private accounts, altered banking ledgers, and created fake wire transfers to make me look like a criminal. You cannot believe a single thing she puts on those screens. She is trying to ruin my life." Judge Rosalind slammed her gavel down, her eyes flashing with judicial fury. "Mr. Williams, sit down and control yourself immediately," she commanded, her voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "This is a court of law, not a theater for your temper tantrums. Your counsel can cross-examine the digital evidence and submit counter-forensic analysis if they suspect tampering. Shouting wild conspiracy theories will only result in you being held in contempt." Trent was too far gone, drowning in the reality of his massive debt and the impending collapse of his universe. He refused to sit down. The violent loan sharks were waiting outside these walls, and losing this custody battle meant losing his only leverage. He needed my trust fund to survive, driving him to make the most unforgivable move of the trial. "You want the real truth," Trent shouted, turning his wild eyes toward the judge. "Forget the computer screens. Ask the boy. Bring my son into this courtroom right now and ask him. Leo will tell you exactly what kind of monster she is. He is terrified of her. She locks him in his room, screams at him, and starves him. Bring Leo to the stand and let him speak." My composure shattered instantly. The firewall I built around my emotions vanished the second he tried dragging our 8-year-old son into this vicious crossfire. I stood up my chair, tipping backward and hitting the floor with a loud crack. I looked directly at Judge Rosalind, my voice shaking with maternal panic. "Your Honor, I strongly object," I pleaded. "He is an innocent little boy. He should absolutely not be subjected to the severe psychological trauma of testifying in this toxic environment. Please do not force him to take the stand." David stood up beside me, raising his hands in a calming gesture. "Your Honor, dragging a young child into a highly contested courtroom setting is entirely unnecessary and incredibly damaging," David argued smoothly. "The digital evidence speaks volumes about the plaintiff's true motives. Subjecting the minor child to cross-examination would be an act of profound emotional cruelty. She is terrified of what he will say." Trent interrupted, aggressively approaching the center aisle. "She knows the boy hates her. She knows he will expose the filthy squalor she forces him to live in. If you want the truth about who the real danger is, you have to let my son speak. Leo will confirm every single word my mother and sister said." In the gallery, Sylvia seized the opportunity to support her son's desperate pivot. She pressed a handkerchief to her eyes, letting out a loud theatrical sob. She leaned forward, whispering loudly enough for the court reporter to hear that the child just needed a safe space to escape his mother's terrifying psychotic breaks. Vanessa followed suit, staring at the judge with wide, pleading eyes, performing the role of the deeply concerned aunt. Judge Rosalind observed the chaos with cold precision. She looked at Trent, whose face was flushed with panicked sweat, then at the weeping women, and finally at me. She saw the genuine terror in my eyes, the pure, desperate fear of a mother trying to shield her child from adult warfare. She tapped her pen thoughtfully against her heavy desk, the rhythmic sound echoing in the tense silence. "Mr. Williams, your outbursts are highly inappropriate, and your attempts to dictate courtroom procedure are entirely unacceptable," Judge Rosalind stated firmly. "However, the allegations of severe physical and emotional abuse have been formally entered into the official court record. Given the extreme contradictory nature of the evidence presented today, I have a supreme legal obligation to determine the true state of mind of the child." My heart plummeted into my stomach. I felt the blood drain completely from my face as I stared at the judge in utter disbelief. I wanted to scream, to grab my laptop and run, to do anything to stop them from placing my boy in the middle of this nightmare. But I was entirely powerless. "I will allow the child to be brought into the courtroom," Judge Rosalind ruled, raising her hand to silence Trent before he could celebrate. "But let me be absolutely clear. This will not be a cross-examination. Neither legal counsel will address the boy. I will speak to him directly from the bench. If anyone attempts to intimidate, coach, or interrupt this child, I will have the bailiff arrest them immediately." Trent smirked, a sick, triumphant gleam returning to his eyes. He genuinely believed that his mother and sister had successfully brainwashed and terrified my son enough to secure their victory. He believed their backstage manipulation would hold up under judicial scrutiny. He thought he had just won. I sank back into my chair, my cold hands trembling violently in my lap. David placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, whispering that we had the truth on our side. But cold logic offered zero comfort to a truly terrified mother. The bailiff walked toward the heavy wooden doors to retrieve Leo from the secure waiting room down the hall. I closed my eyes, praying that my son's spirit remained unbroken, unaware that my brave 8-year-old boy was about to deliver a payload that would completely obliterate his father's entire fragile universe. The heavy wooden courtroom doors slowly swung open. The bailiff walked in, leading my 8-year-old son by the hand. Leo looked incredibly small inside that cavernous judicial space, wearing the neat button-down shirt and pants I had carefully ironed for him. His brown eyes were wide, taking in the imposing walls and intimidating adults staring directly at him. My heart fractured watching his innocent face process the toxic atmosphere his father had dragged him into. As the bailiff guided Leo down the center aisle, Trent leaned forward, offering a fake, encouraging smile that failed to reach his cold eyes. The true psychological warfare was happening in the gallery behind him. Sylvia fixed Leo with a terrifying, unblinking glare, narrowing her eyes in a silent warning that conveyed absolute danger. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly, pressing her lips together in a punishing line. They were actively attempting to silently terrorize an 8-year-old boy into committing perjury. I felt a violent urge to physically remove those women from the courtroom. The maternal instinct to shield my child was overwhelming. However, any emotional breakdown would play into the unstable narrative Trent constructed. I forced my body to remain perfectly still, anchoring my feet to the floor and resting my hands flat on the table. When Leo finally glanced toward my side, I caught his gaze securely. Tears pooled in my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I offered him a soft, reassuring smile, pouring my unconditional protection into that single look. I nodded slowly, communicating a silent promise that he was safe. Leo took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing as he absorbed my silent support. The bailiff gently directed Leo to the witness stand beside the judge's elevated bench. The chair was too large, causing his feet to dangle above the floor. Judge Rosalind instantly transformed her demeanor. The fierce judicial authority evaporated, replaced by soothing warmth, bringing herself closer to his eye level. Her face softened into an expression of genuine grandmotherly kindness, altering the intimidating dynamic. "Hello there, Leo," she said, her voice soft and melodious. "My name is Rosalind, and I am the judge here today. I know this room looks very big and scary, but I promise you there is absolutely nothing to be afraid of. You are the most important person in this building today, and my only job is to make sure you are safe and happy." Leo blinked, looking at her with lingering apprehension. He nodded silently, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the railing. Judge Rosalind smiled warmly, completely putting him at ease. "Can you tell me how old you are and what grade you are in?" "I am 8 years old," Leo answered, his voice a fragile whisper. "I am in the 2nd grade at Oak Ridge Elementary." "That is a fantastic age," Judge Rosalind replied, her tone bright. "Do you have a favorite subject in school? Or maybe a favorite game you like to play at recess?" Leo glanced quickly toward my table, drawing strength from my smile before looking back. "I really like science class," he said, his voice gaining a fraction of confidence. "And I like playing tetherball with my friends during recess." "Science is wonderful," Judge Rosalind agreed, leaning in slightly. "Now, Leo, I want to talk a little bit about your home. Can you tell me what it is like living at your mom's house?" The tension in the courtroom spiked immediately. Trent stiffened in his chair, his jaw clenching tight. Sylvia and Vanessa leaned further forward in the gallery, their eyes drilling holes into the back of Leo's head. "Yes, I have my own room," Leo answered, shifting slightly in the large chair. "It has blue walls and a big bookshelf for my comic books. My mom makes sure I always have clean clothes for school, and she packs my lunch every single morning. She always puts a little note in my lunchbox." "That sounds very nice," Judge Rosalind noted, gently encouraging him. "And what about dinner time?" "Dinner? Do you and your mom eat together?" "We eat dinner at the kitchen table every night," Leo said, relaxing a bit more. "My mom cooks really good food, and we talk about what happened at school. After dinner, she helps me with my math homework, and then we read books before I go to sleep." Judge Rosalind nodded slowly, absorbing the picture of domestic stability Leo was painting. It stood in stark contrast to the horrific fictional squalor, Vanessa had described under oath just an hour earlier. The judge paused for a moment, letting the silence settle before asking the most critical question of the hearing. Leo, you are doing a wonderful job, she said, her voice dropping to a serious but incredibly gentle pitch. I need to ask you something very important, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Nobody in this room is allowed to be mad at you for telling the truth. When you think about where you feel the most comfortable and where you feel the absolute safest in the whole world, where is that? The atmosphere in the courtroom grew so thick it felt difficult to breathe. Trent gripped his pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. Sylvia glared from the back row, attempting to transmit her final toxic threat. I sat perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs, sending a silent wave of courage to my brave little boy. Leo looked at his father, seeing the aggressive expectation masking his panic. He looked past the partition at Sylvia and Vanessa, seeing the cold, manipulative malice radiating from their rigid postures. Finally, he turned his head and looked directly at me. I gave him a soft, reassuring nod, reminding him of the promise I made in his bedroom. He took a deep, shaky breath, gathering every ounce of bravery in his 8-year-old body. He turned back to Judge Rosalind, his brown eyes locking onto hers. The young boy who was supposed to be a pawn in their elaborate extortion scheme was about to bravely and completely dismantle their entire golden facade right here and now in front of everyone in the room. Leo sat in the oversized wooden chair, his small hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. The heavy silence pressed down on everyone. He looked across the room at his father. Trent stared back, demanding obedience. Leo then looked past the partition toward the gallery. Sylvia and Vanessa were glaring at him, trying to silently force him into submission. Finally, Leo turned his gaze back to Judge Rosalind. She nodded once, granting him silent permission to speak. Leo took a deep, shaky breath. His lower lip quivered and his voice trembled when he finally broke the silence. Mom told me never to say this because she did not want Dad to go to jail. She said Dad was just sick and needed a doctor to help him get better. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The word jail hung in the sterile air. Trent jolted in his leather chair. He opened his mouth to shout an objection, but Judge Rosalind immediately raised her hand, shooting him a glare so furious that it pinned him back. The judge turned, her attention back to the 8-year-old boy, her voice dropping to a remarkably gentle whisper. It is completely okay, Leo. What did your mom not want you to say? Leo reached a trembling hand into his pocket. He fumbled for a moment before pulling out a burner phone. He gripped it, holding it up for the judge to see. On my birthday, Dad picked me up for his weekend, but he did not take me to the arcade like he promised. He took me to a giant building with really bright, flashing neon lights. He left me in his car in the dark parking lot. It was freezing cold outside and the heater was turned off. Trent began shaking his head frantically, mouthing the word no toward the judge, but the bailiff instantly stepped forward, resting a stern hand on his weapon. Trent froze, completely trapped by his own catastrophic choices. The entire courtroom waited for the brave child to finish. I was locked inside the freezing car for 5 whole hours. Leo continued his testimony. Dad told me to stay hidden down on the floorboards if anyone walked by. He said he had to go inside the bright building to fix a big mistake. He gave me this old phone to play puzzle games so I would not get scared or complain about the freezing cold. But the games were boring, and the phone kept buzzing with text messages. I sat perfectly still at the defense table, tears streaming down my face. I had known about the casino incident thanks to the tracking device, but hearing my brave son recount the terror of that night shattered my heart. I wanted to run to the witness stand and pull him into my arms, but I knew he needed to finish. He needed to dismantle their reign of abuse. Judge Rosalind looked at the burner phone in the boy's hand, her judicial composure replaced by profound, devastating sorrow. Did you read the messages on that phone? Leo? She asked softly, her voice full of empathy. Leo nodded, his eyes reflecting a maturity no 8-year-old child should ever possess. I did not mean to snoop. He explained, his voice wavering slightly, but a message popped up on the screen while I was trying to play the game. It was a message from Grandma Sylvia. I know her phone number because she makes me memorize it. I took a screenshot of the message because it sounded really mean, and I wanted to show my mom later. Sylvia let out a strangled, breathless gasp from the gallery. She clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes darting wildly toward the heavy exit doors. Vanessa shrank back into the wooden bench, her arrogant posture collapsing into pure panic. They had assumed Trent used an untraceable device, oblivious to the fact that he carelessly handed the damning evidence directly to the child. "Can you please read that message for the court?" "Leo," Judge Rosalind requested, her voice echoing with absolute, uncompromising authority. Leo pressed the power button on the battered device. The screen illuminated his small face with a harsh, artificial glow. He navigated to the photo gallery with practiced ease, opening the screenshot he had preserved for months. He took one final steadying breath, looking directly at his father before reading the text aloud. The courtroom remained entirely silent. Leo read the message from Sylvia to Trent with perfect, heartbreaking clarity. "Leave the brat in the car. I have got the fake papers ready to lock Lauren up. We will have the trust fund by next month." The sheer malice of the words spoken in the innocent voice of a child struck the courtroom like a physical shockwave. The absolute depravity of their coordinated extortion plot was now laid bare, stripped of all deniability. Sylvia had orchestrated the destruction of my life, while simultaneously dismissing her own grandson as a mere nuisance to be left freezing in a dark parking lot. She cared only about securing the financial payout. Trent buried his face in his hands, letting out a broken sob. His high-priced legal team stared at the floor, paralyzed by the reality of their client's criminal behavior. They had spent the morning defending a man who endangered his own child. Judge Rosalind closed her eyes for a moment, taking a calming breath to compose herself. When she opened them, the grandmotherly warmth had vanished entirely. She looked at the gallery, fixing Sylvia and Vanessa with a cold stare that promised absolute retribution. The Golden family had built their empire on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and cruelty. They severely underestimated my intelligence and drastically underestimated the brave, observant little boy on the witness stand. The truth was finally out in the open, fully exposed for everyone to witness, and the impending consequences were going to be merciless for all of them. Judge Rosalind stared at the glowing screen of the cheap burner phone resting in my 8-year-old son's. Trembling hands, the crushing weight of the text message echoed off the high wooden ceiling of the courtroom. Sylvia had just been exposed, orchestrating a malicious plot to lock me in a psychiatric facility and steal my trust fund. But the horrifying reality of that freezing night in the casino parking lot was not over yet. What happened next? "Leo," the judge asked, her voice cracking slightly before she cleared her throat to regain her steady judicial composure. "After your father left you in the car and gave you that phone, how did you get home?" Leo looked down at his lap, his small chest heaving as he fought back tears. He sniffled loudly, his brave facade finally beginning to crumble under the immense emotional weight of the memory. "Mom found me," he whimpered, his voice breaking. "She tracked my backpack. When she got there, I was crying because my fingers and toes hurt so bad from the cold. The car doors were locked, and Dad had taken the keys inside the bright building. I closed my eyes, the visceral memory of that terrifying night rushing back. The sheer panic of finding my child locked in a freezing vehicle while his father gambled away his future. Mom called the police to help open the doors." Leo continued, large tears now spilling over his eyelashes and tracking down his pale cheeks. "But when she heard the police sirens coming down the street, she started crying too. She looked at the building where Dad went, and she told me she did not want Dad to go to jail. She said Dad was just sick and needed a doctor, not a prison cell." Trent sat frozen at the plaintiff table. His high-priced lawyers leaned away from him as if his presence was physically toxic. He was being dismantled, not by a ruthless opposing counsel, but by the innocent, heartbreaking honesty of the son he had neglected. So Mom took off her heavy winter coat and wrapped it around her fist. Leo sobbed, his voice echoing in the absolute silence of the courtroom. She punched the car window really hard. It shattered everywhere. The glass cut her arm and her hand. She bled all over her shirt so she could reach inside and unlock the door to get me out. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Even David, my composed and calculating attorney, turned to look at me with profound astonishment. I had never told anyone the full truth about how my hand was severely lacerated. That night, I had kept the secret buried to protect Leo from the trauma of watching his father be arrested in handcuffs. When the police cars parked behind us, Mom hid my father's burner phone in her pocket. Leo cried, wiping his wet face with the back of his sleeve. She held her bleeding hand and lied to the police officers. She told them she accidentally locked her keys and her son inside the car and panicked. She bled so Dad would not get arrested for leaving me to freeze. She took the blame so I would not be scared. The sheer magnitude of the sacrifice hung heavily in the sterile courtroom air. I had literally bled to protect a man who later tried to institutionalize me. I had endured physical pain and lied to law enforcement solely to preserve my son's fragile image of his father. And Trent had repaid that ultimate sacrifice by dragging me into family court and attempting to steal my child judge. Rosalind reached up and removed her glasses. Her hands were shaking slightly. She looked at me sitting quietly at the defense table, and for a fleeting moment, the professional boundary between judge and mother vanished. She saw the absolute unconditional ferocity of maternal love. Then she put her glasses back on and turned her attention to the gallery, her dark eyes locking onto Sylvia and Vanessa. "Leo, you are being incredibly brave today," Judge Rosalind said, her voice a soothing anchor in the turbulent room. "But I need to ask you one more very difficult question. If your father left you in the cold and your mother sacrificed herself to save you, why did your grandmother and your aunt want you to testify today? What did they ask you to tell me?" Leo flinched physically, recoiling toward the judge's bench, as if trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and his toxic relatives. He raised his right hand and pointed a shaking finger directly at the gallery. He aimed it squarely at Vanessa and Sylvia, who were now shrinking back into the wooden benches, their faces drained of all color. "Grandma and Aunt Vanessa pulled me aside yesterday when Dad brought me to their big house," Leo said, his voice rising in panic. "They took me into the garage where nobody else could hear us. They told me I had to stand up in front of the judge today and say that my mom was crazy. They told me I had to say, 'My mom screams at me and locks me in dark closets.'" Vanessa leaped up from her seat in the gallery, her face contorted in sheer terror. "Your Honor, that is a complete lie!" she shrieked, violating every rule of courtroom decorum. "The boy is confused. He is making things up. Bailiff, secure that woman immediately." Judge Rosalind roared, her voice booming like thunder. "If she opens her mouth one more time, arrest her for contempt and place her in a holding cell." The armed bailiff marched swiftly toward the gallery, placing a firm hand on Vanessa's shoulder and forcing her aggressively back into her seat. The courtroom returned to a terrified, breathless silence. Judge Rosalind turned back to my son, her expression softening instantly. "Go ahead, Leo. Nobody is going to hurt you. What else did they say to you in the garage?" Leo let out a gut-wrenching sob that tore through my chest. "They told me if I did not lie to you today, they would take my golden retriever away," he cried, his small body shaking with devastation. "Grandma Sylvia said, she knows people who collect unwanted dogs. She told me if I told the truth about Dad leaving me at the casino, she would take my dog Max away and put him to sleep forever. They promised they would kill my best friend if I did not help them lock my mom away." The courtroom went dead silent. It was a suffocating, heavy silence that felt like a vacuum had sucked all the oxygen from the room. Extorting money from a trust fund was a severe financial crime. Forging medical documents was a federal offense. But threatening to execute an 8-year-old child's beloved pet to coerce him into committing perjury against his own mother was an act of pure, unadulterated evil. I watched Judge Rosalind carefully. The veteran jurist, a woman who had spent decades presiding over the most bitter, ugly family disputes imaginable, was visibly moved to tears. A single tear escaped her eye and tracked slowly down her cheek. She did not bother to wipe it away. She simply let it fall, a silent testament to the horrific psychological abuse inflicted upon the innocent boy sitting beside her. Then the profound sorrow on the judge's face vanished. It was replaced instantly by a look of absolute righteous fury, the kind of raw, uncompromising anger that precedes a catastrophic judicial reckoning. She slowly turned her piercing gaze away from Leo and fixed it permanently on Trent, Sylvia, and Vanessa. The Golden family was no longer facing a family court judge mediating a custody dispute. They were facing an executioner. Judge Rosalind did not simply deliver a ruling, she delivered a complete and absolute annihilation. She stood up behind her heavy oak desk, towering over the courtroom with a presence that commanded total submission. She looked directly at Trent, who was now physically shaking in his expensive Italian suit. This court has witnessed countless bitter disputes. Judge Rosalind began, her voice ringing like a bell warning of a storm. But the sheer coordinated malice, the profound cruelty, and the staggering criminality displayed by the plaintiff and his family today is entirely unprecedented. You did not come here to protect a child, Mr. Williams. You came here to execute a sophisticated financial extortion scheme using the state judicial system as your weapon. Trent opened his mouth to beg, but the judge silenced him with a sharp downward motion of her hand. Based on the irrefutable digital evidence and the highly credible, terrifying testimony of this brave 8-year-old boy, I am denying your emergency custody petition in its entirety, Judge Rosalind declared, her words striking Trent like physical blows. Furthermore, I am permanently revoking all of your visitation rights. You will not be allowed within 500 feet of Lauren or Leo Williams. You are stripped of all parental authority, effective this very second. Trent collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands, letting out a loud, agonizing wail. His high-priced legal team did not comfort him. Instead, the lead attorney quietly zipped up his leather briefcase, stepping away from the table to physically distance himself from his radioactive client. But Judge Rosalind was far from finished. She turned her piercing gaze toward the gallery, focusing entirely on Sylvia and Vanessa. I am not just a family court judge, she stated coldly. I am an officer of the law, bound to report active felony crimes committed within my jurisdiction. The evidence presented today proves massive fraud, perjury, child endangerment, and cybercrimes. She picked up her wooden gavel, gripping it tightly. Bailiff, lock the doors, Judge. Doors, Rosalind commanded. The armed officers immediately moved to the heavy wooden exits standing in front of them, with their hands resting on their utility belts. I am issuing immediate bench warrants for Trent Williams, Sylvia Williams, and Vanessa Williams. Judge Rosalind announced, the finality of her words echoing loudly. I am ordering all 3 of you to be taken into police custody right now, directly from this courtroom. You will be transported to the county jail to await federal and state arraignments for your criminal conspiracy against this mother and her child. The courtroom erupted into absolute chaos. Sylvia leaped to her feet, screaming in sheer terror as 2 armed bailiffs marched directly toward her. She tried to run, but her designer heels betrayed her. She stumbled, falling back onto the wooden bench. The bailiffs grabbed her wrists, pulling them forcefully behind her back. The sharp, metallic clicking sound of handcuffs locking around the wrists of the wealthy, untouchable banking executive was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Sylvia sobbed hysterically, begging the officers to let her go, screaming that she was a senior vice president and could not be arrested like a common criminal. Next to her, Vanessa was hyperventilating openly. weeping as a female bailiff secured her wrists in iron cuffs. Vanessa spun around wildly, searching the back of the gallery for any sign of salvation. "DeAndre, do something," she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. "Tell them this is a mistake. DeAndre, help me." From the very back row of the courtroom, standing completely untouched by the chaos, DeAndre stepped out of the shadows. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, looking incredibly calm and profoundly powerful. He walked slowly down the center aisle, ignoring the screaming and the scrambling of the disgraced Golden family. He stopped right at the edge of the wooden partition, looking down at his hysterical, handcuffed wife. Vanessa stared up at him, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "Please call a lawyer," she begged him. DeAndre reached inside his suit jacket and slowly pulled out a thick manila envelope. He held it out, dropping it gently onto the wooden bench right next to where Vanessa was sitting. "I am not calling anyone," DeAndre said, his voice remarkably steady and completely devoid of any affection. "Those are divorce papers. I signed them this morning." Vanessa gasped, staring at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. But why, she cried out. "What did I do?" "You treated me like a secondary citizen for 5 years," DeAndre replied, looking from Vanessa to Sylvia and finally to Trent. "You thought I was just the quiet black man who should be grateful to stand in your family photos. You constantly underestimated my intelligence. You forgot that I am a forensic accountant. I am the one who tracked Trent's illegal offshore gambling debts. I am the one who gave Lauren the encrypted USB drive. I audited your entire lives, and I found you all completely morally bankrupt." DeAndre buttoned his suit jacket, adjusting his cuffs with perfect precision. "Have fun in federal prison," he said coldly. He turned around and walked out of the courtroom, through the heavy wooden doors without ever looking back. I watched the police physically drag Trent, Sylvia, and Vanessa out of the side doors toward the holding cells. Their screams faded into the concrete hallways, leaving behind a beautiful, peaceful silence. Judge Rosalind looked down at me, offering a small, respectful nod before stepping down from the bench. The war was officially over. I knelt down, wrapping my arms tightly around Leo. He hugged my neck, burying his face in my shoulder. "We did it, baby," I whispered into his ear. "You are so brave, and we are finally safe, David." My brilliant, unassuming attorney packed up his legal pads and gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You played a perfect game, Lauren," he told me, smiling softly. "Go take your boy home." I held Leo's hand tightly as we walked down the center aisle, leaving the wreckage of the Golden family behind us. We pushed through the heavy courthouse doors and stepped out into the glorious, bright spring sunlight. The warm air hit my face, feeling incredibly sweet. I had walked into that building as a target, but I was walking out as a conqueror. I had protected my beautiful son. I had secured my vast financial wealth, and I had established an absolute boundary of steel. The toxic family had tried to destroy me, but their own arrogance and cruelty had destroyed them instead. We walked toward my car, ready to start our beautiful new life, far away from the darkness. You can never choose the family you are born into or married into, but you can absolutely choose what you are willing to tolerate. Setting boundaries is not a sign of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-preservation. When people show you they are willing to burn your life down to keep themselves warm, you have to be willing to let them set themselves on fire. Have you ever had to keep a painful secret to protect someone you loved, only to realize you had to expose the truth to save yourself? I would love to hear your stories of survival and setting strong boundaries in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more authentic stories of resilience, strength, and standing up to toxic family dynamics. Thank you so much for being part of my journey today, and always remember that your worth is never defined by the people who failed to love you properly. You are powerful, and you are completely in control of your own story. The harrowing journey of Lauren and her young son Leo serves as a powerful testament to one undeniable truth. Unwavering composure and meticulous preparation are the ultimate shields against toxic manipulation. When faced with a family willing to weaponize an innocent child for their own financial gain, reacting with explosive anger or panic is exactly what abusers expect and desire. Lauren's story teaches us that true strength does not require shouting or matching the chaotic energy of those trying to destroy you. Instead of engaging in public screaming matches or crumbling under the weight of fabricated evidence and vicious character assassination, she anchored herself completely in undeniable facts. Toxic individuals like Trent and Sylvia thrive on provoking emotional reactions. They use your defensive panic as proof of your supposed instability. By maintaining her strategic silence and leaning on the immutable truth backed by digital forensics and the quiet observations of unexpected allies like DeAndre Loren, effectively stripped her abusers of their only weapon. Furthermore, this narrative illustrates that setting ironclad boundaries is never an act of cruelty, but rather a profound necessity for personal self-preservation. You cannot heal in the same environment that actively poisons you, nor can you negotiate with people who view your suffering as a mere stepping stone to their own selfish success. Lauren had to let the Golden family collapse under the crushing weight of their own arrogance to permanently secure her son's safety and her own future. Her victory was not just in winning a family court case, but in definitively severing ties with the darkness. Ultimately, we learn that we must stop bleeding just to protect those who would gladly watch us freeze. Take a moment today to evaluate your own relationships and set the uncompromising boundaries necessary to protect your absolute peace.